All right, so this is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be putting out talking about The Art of War by Sun Tzu, or the Sun Tzu Bing Fa. And so what I'm trying to do here is to introduce the original text in a way that people can actually interact with so that they don't have to rely on translations. So first, I want to talk about the title just really briefly. So, Sun Tzu Bing Fa. Sun Tzu is the person who the text is attributed to, and then Bing Fa is actually the content of the work, which we can understand by understanding these two characters here. The first one being Bing, which means something like a weapon, or then the person who uses the weapon, the warrior, or the thing that is done by using the weapon, something like warfare. The second character here is something that's a little bit complex in its deeper meaning, but fundamentally it's something like method or way. So we can understand this title as being Bing describing Fa, warfare describing method, meaning it's the method of warfare, right? And then this is the person, so it's the method of warfare by Sun Tzu, right? So that's where we get this art of war. Some people translate it as art. You can also think of it as method. It's art in that sense, the method of warfare. So I'm going to be walking through this pretty slowly and without assuming that someone would be familiar with anything that hasn't been read yet, meaning that as we read through this, if there's some term that ends up becoming a really important aspect of the ideas being presented, we're not going to know that until we get to the ideas as they're presented later. So while we're looking at the text initially, some things that might be translated a little bit differently, if we were to know what Sun Tzu is going to say later, I'm just going to translate them as if we don't know about that, right? So there might be things that if you're already very familiar with translations of the Art of War, or even with the original text itself, you might be like, oh, he didn't translate that right. Well, I'm doing that because I want this to be more of an experience of reading as opposed to a recitation of like dogma, the way that the text is always like interpreted by people who study it or read it. So as I walk through this, I'm going to be talking about the grammar as well. And so I haven't really pulled out too much text here. It's only like the first line of the text. But even though it's just this little bit, there's a lot to talk about it, especially in terms of basic grammar. But as we move forward through the text, we'll actually be able to start ignoring some of the grammatical points that we're already familiar with, or just talk about them in passing. So to start off, a lot of these early texts that we see from this period, specifically like the Warring States period, have this kind of structure here where you have someone, in this case it's Sun Tzu, the person the text is attributed to, saying something. This character Yue, this is the same, this structure, Sun Tzu said, is the same structure that then spawned the term Confucius says, that kind of thing. For Confucius, it's Kongzi Yue. In this case, it's Sun Tzu Yue. So Sun Tzu said, Bing Zhe. So this is our topic. So this is a good point to talk about topic, comment, structures. So Bing Zhe is our topic, while all this over here is our comment. Okay? So in classical Chinese, this kind of sentence structure is very, very common, where you introduce a topic and then you make some comments about it. Now, in this case, you can even break up this big comment into 4 smaller comments. We'll call those 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So we have topic, which we can call A, and then we have comment, which we can call B. And what that basically is saying is A equals B. Now that's not always the case, and we'll encounter that as we move forward. But in this initial case, Sun Tzu is actually just making basically an equivalence, like A is B. Now A is 1, is 2, is 3, is 4 as well. So we can actually break his comment B down into all these different sections. But by doing this, he makes a more compact thing because he doesn't have to keep repeating A. He can just say A equals 1, A equals 2, A equals 3, and A equals 4. Okay? So Now, within the topic, we already recognize Bing, that's warfare, the same Bing from Bing Fa in the title. This is warfare. Now, the second character here, zhe, is our first grammatical point. So what zhe does is it actually nominalizes and also, in a way, highlights the thing that precedes it. So in this case, let's just take some x and we put a zhe behind it. So what that tells us is now x, this thing that's before it, is a noun. So it turns it into a noun, right? But it also highlights it. So it's like noun, this noun. So in this case, warfare. We're highlighting warfare. What is warfare? Warfare is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we got warfare is 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's look at 1. 国之大事. This is actually really good for us because it lets us talk about our second grammar point, which is this zhi. So zhi itself doesn't really have any meaning on its own. It's either a placeholder or it's something that is used to connect things. Now, this particular statement is really cool for us because we see something that really helps us explain the usage of zhi, because this selection here, 国之大事, these 4 characters, can actually also be written in this way. 国之大之事. So this can actually help us understand what's actually going on with this grammar, because this 事, which means like affair or thing, like affair is in like the affairs of state, which actually is what this actually is talking about. This noun is being modified by big, or in this case, probably something more like great. So this is a great affair, right? So you could technically write this as 大之事, like where 之 is connecting great to affair. But in this case, because we have another thing which is modifying shi, 国, which means state, we don't want to keep repeating this 之 over and over and over again. So in this case, Sun Tzu actually drops that first 之. And so what we are left with is actually 国之大事, which is a contracted form of this larger 国之大之事. Right? So we have affair. What kind of affair? A great affair. And then what kind of a great affair? It is a great affair of the state. Okay, so the second one here, the second little chunk, is saying that warfare, it is a great affair of the state. Okay, so that's the first one. That could be taken by itself, but instead of having a separate statement and then repeating again Bingzhe 2, he connects them all together, so we can just move straight on into 2. So here we see that zhi again. So this is 死生之地. So di, the basic meaning is ground, but it could mean like basis, place. But we can just think of it as like a place in this case, or the land where. And then it's being modified by something. This zhi is still acting as that connector, the modifier. So it's connecting these two right here with this guy. Okay, so now this is a little bit different in structure from this. You can't change this into 死之生之地. That's not okay. What we actually have here, 死 and 生, are death and life. So together they're taken as life and death, right? It's that combination. It's an and a coordination as opposed to a modifying coordination. Okay, so here we have life and death connected to place. So what he's saying is that warfare is the basis of life and death. It is the place where life and death are determined. At least that's how I read it. Okay, so far what do we have? We have warfare. It is a great affair of the state. It is the place of life and death. It is the basis of life and death. Cool. So now we're going to move on to 3, which is still talking about warfare, remember. So this is saying warfare. 存亡之道. So this is the exact same structure as what we saw here with 死生之地. So this Dao is the same Dao of like Taoism. It means the way or the method or the process through which. Okay, so this Dao is like the way. 存亡. So 存is to save or to have. 亡 is to lose or be without. So it is the way of having and not having, literally. Okay, same structure there. So we don't really need to talk too much about that. This 存亡 is actually a combination connected to Dao, just like 死生 was connected to Di. Nice. So then we can move on from our third one. So far we have warfare. It is a great affair of the state. It is the basis of life and death. It is the way of having and not having, or obtaining and losing, holding and losing. And then our last one, again, we have warfare for 不可不察也. So now we're going to first talk about these four here and then leave this last guy for the end, okay? Because there's a little bit of a different thing that I have to talk about there. So this is interesting because we can introduce not only 不 but also 可. So 不 is a negator. So what it does is it negates a verb. 不 verb equals not verb. Okay, so in this case, this is our verb 察, which means to examine, to learn, to explore, that kind of thing. More like examine. So in this case, 不察 is to not examine. All right, but we have a second negation here, which probably means we're going to be examining. But so what we have actually here together is 不可. So 可, this 可 means like can. So together with 不可is cannot. And together 不可不 is something along the lines of cannot help but, like you must. It's more like you must. You are not able to not do something, which means you must, right? So in this case, it's saying you must examine it. You cannot not examine it. So when you see this in English translation, you have to like make a decision. The translator has to make a decision. They either have to say that you must examine it, or they have to preserve that double negation, which a lot of people don't like to hear in English. But in reality, when you're reading the Chinese, it's trying to place emphasis on that by including the double negative, right? So it's you cannot not examine it. And he's really drawing emphasis onto that. All right, so warfare, you must examine it, or you cannot not examine it. Now this last thing here, ye, is actually part of this topic comment equivalence thing. So we already talked about how a topic A is equal to a comment B. But now to complete that whole thing, you tend to actually do something like this. A, comma, B, yeah. And what this does is it kind of completes that equivalence. This is the predicate marker. It's marking that second section. Now he's saying this is the end of my little equivalence statement. So it has topic, warfare, is. This is actually the is, basically. It's not really the is, but you can think of it kind of in that way, at least when you're getting started. So the topic warfare is a great affair of the state. It is the place of life and death. It is the basis of life and death. It is the way of having and not having, or storing and losing. And it is something that must be examined or cannot not be examined. So that's our first line and the accompanying grammar. So what I would suggest that you do is you work through this, listen to the video, and basically come up with your own translation and learn these different grammar points and vocabulary words so that as we move forward, you're already familiar with what happened in the first video so that you can then apply that to the text of the second video. And as we move through this, we'll actually be picking up the pace because I will have already expected you to have become familiar with what came before it. So thank you guys, and I hope you really enjoyed this and will continue to watch. Thank you.